social media platforms at KBC Channel 1 and at Abdiaziz Hashim 2. Let me get to introduce my guest this particular morning. Of course, we start off with seniority. Amaniaje. Start with the professor. Professor, thank you for joining us. He is a professor at the University of Nairobi. He's also an economist. Mr. Iraqi, thank you for joining us, Prof. Next to the professor, somebody who crunches the numbers. He will be telling us what are the outlooks of these particular numbers is none other than Alexander Rithi, the head of programs at TISA. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Of course, a familiar face here, that is David Alulu. He is the Chief Executive Officer at the Regional Agency for International Development and Leadership. Karibu sana, David.
Asante.
And then finally, we do have Vincent Kimosop. He is a governance expert. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to start with Alexander. Alexander, I'm sure TISA in the coming days, or you have already released some figures in terms of the economic outlook of this particular country. If you do have any statistics, kindly share with us how is the economy looking and what are people telling you in terms of the surveys that you're conducting?
Thank you very much. We, as TISA, move along with the budget calendar of the state. And currently what we have done, we've already made submissions on what we think should come in the next finance bill, if it will be there, or if the state will choose to use any other means. We've made proposals on tax measures that we think would be favorable to reduce the cost of living, and tax measures that would make primary production in agriculture and manufacturing easier. And our aim is to ensure that the final product that is getting to the consumer is at a favorable price. Looking at the rating that has happened in the past on our pay slips, then we need to look at ways of ensuring that the little money that is left can afford you as much as possible to keep your family up. Yes.
And Prof, given that you're in the classrooms at the end of the day, but you can keep an eye on what is happening in the economy, just tell us, what is your view on the current economic outlook of this particular country this year?
I think that's an interesting question, because as I was walking here, it was raining.
Okay.
And the economic outlook of this country the next 1 year will depend on three things. One, I suspect, is the rain. Because if it rains, the price of goods go down, because food is a very big factor in predicting the price of goods and services. The other one is the price, what is going to happen outside Kenya, the price of oil. So if the oil prices goes up, it affects the Kenyan economy. And I think the third one is politics. I think Kenya, we cannot talk about the Kenyan economic growth without looking at politics. So if it is going to rain, if the price of oil stabilizes, if politics stabilizes, I think the economic outlook will be very bright. The IMF gives a projection of about 5% this year. The CBK is more optimistic, 5.5%. But I think the projection is something in between. But most important, we also must factor in the sentiments of the ordinary Kenyans. What do they feel about this year? What do they feel about the prospects of the economy? Because you cannot talk about the economic growth without talking about the feeling and the sentiments of the people. But all in all, I hope things will
country, but then we also need to attract investors. We want to create an environment where an investor feels safe, and not very many investors want to invest in a noise-making environment. We want a conducive climate, a good market, a good statistics. So it is looking good. So far, I think it is, but then the players in the market are very rough. So we might want to look at the language used in the marketplace.
Vincent, is there a good political goodwill in this particular country to ensure that the finance bill this time around at least addresses some of the concerns that have been raised?
Let me put on a feather that I seldom put on when I come on these shows. My actual background is economics. I'm an economist. So let me speak with some authority.
Yes.
That when you want to look at an economy, there are three macro prices. Like the way when you go to the market, what are the things you're looking at? So the number one thing, not in any order, but three of them are very important. You're looking at inflation, which is the general prices in terms of the rise and fall of prices within the economy. Then you also look at the issue of exchange rates. As in how stable is your shilling? How much money that do you have in terms of your reserves if you were to go to the market, particularly foreign exchange, in this context the US dollar, because it's one of the most traded currency globally. Then the third thing, you look at interest rates. So since you've told me to paint the picture of the economy,
Yes.
On interest on inflation, inflation has been has been declining. It's been reducing. I think in the month of October we recorded the lowest in 2 decades at 2.7%. So inflation has been on the decline. The question then generally says that if inflation is on the decline, why are we not feeling it, particularly as the ordinary citizens? And there is an answer towards the same. Exchange rates, I think the highest at some point recorded was around 160, 162. It is stabilized for long at 128, 129. Now, the beauty of that stability of 128, 129 is that you are able to plan, knowing with certainty, for example, how is the currency performing. Even particularly when when we are repaying our debt, which we repay in foreign currencies, there is a lot of savings that you can make as a result of a stabilized currency. And then also, if you look at the central bank reserves, I think now you have over 4 months import cover. Like if nothing was to happen, the country would be able to, if it was to use what it has, for over 4.5 months, it's able to use the reserves that has been built over time. Then finally, is the issue of interest rates. Also, interest rates have been coming down. I think the last monetary policy announcement was 11.2%, 2.5%. Now, the questions then therefore is that if we were then to have the ordinary conversation, is that these numbers are coming down. What do they mean to the ordinary person? How comes we are not feeling it? And if you would allow me, I can give that explanation.
Yes.
On inflation, the food component are the ones that still are problematic in terms of because you pick up baskets of goods and then you track them over time. The food component is still an issue. The other challenge is also when it comes to the issue of interest rates. Monetary policy transmission has been a challenge, particularly on getting the banks to lend. The lending has been a problem, and then therefore that affects how the private sector gets to have money. Then the other thing that also has been a challenge is that we have a problem of pending bills. I think at the moment the estimate of pending bills is to a tune of over 460 billion. Now you can imagine that amount of money that is outside the circulations in the private sector. So with reduced lending by our banking sector, together with pending bills, then this money is not therefore in circulation. And then, sorry, I have to just also say this in terms of the last thing is that if you look at the other things that we are seeing is that we have the latest ratings, the one that came from Moody rating, the CAA1 that shows that that Kenya's ability to repay its debt that latest rating is also positive, meaning that the government can acquire or can access more credit in different markets. So with all this, I think from a meso and a macro level, things are positive. The challenge is at the micro level. And I wish those who are responsible in articulating and communicating these things would bring these figures from the meso macro level to an ordinary day conversation where the people can participate.
And Prof, I think you can help us here. How does it reach? Because you see, at the end of the day, the households needs to feel this impact. If the economy, the administration is saying the economy is okay, economists are saying it is okay, CBK is saying it is okay, even KRA clearly stating that the economy is quite growing at a good pace that they had anticipated. But at the end of the day, the households do not feel that particular impact. How do they bridge that gap?
I think my partner was very articulate in saying that if the economy is doing very well, we need to communicate that to the ordinary people. And they need to feel it, not just hear it. For example, when you talk about inflation, that has been very good news. But I'm one of those people who argue that while inflation is going down, it could be because we have no money. Because if you have no money, there's no demand for goods and services, and the price don't go up. If you look at the interest rates, very good news, the interest rates are going down, but they are not going down as fast as expected. Because a lot of money is being borrowed by the government, and the government is competing with me and you. So I'll be very happy if there was more growth in private credit, because that's where the economic action is. And when you look at the pending bills, I'm happy you brought that, because when we talk about bills, about debts in this country, we focus too much on foreign debt, but charity starts at home. So if you can ask the economist, Kim Sopadafayed, he'll tell you that the GDP is money times velocity. So when you don't pay people bills, you reduce the velocity of money circulation, and that slows down the economic growth. So I wish the government, the counties, can pay more pending bills, so that money can be put into circulation. On the issue of Modi rating, I thought that quite interesting. Should we focus on Modi rating for the country creditworthiness, or should we focus on the citizen credit rating? Because even the citizens themselves rate the government. They rate the performance of banks and so on. That's why at the beginning I talked about sentiments of the people.
Yes.
We can have all this good news, but if people feel the economy is not doing very well, then probably it not do very well. So as we communicate to the Kenyan citizens, we communicate to the key players in this economy, which is me and you, we must talk their language, and we must always project positive news into the future. Because before we tell them whatever they are telling them, they have their feelings. And the question everybody is asking on the streets, and even if you walk around there, is, if the economy is growing, where is the money? Because the economy can grow, but what matters is, do I have money in the pocket?
Yes.
And I think one thing we need to inform Kenyans is that the economy, if the economy is growing, you don't feel it immediately. The economists will tell you the growth is always with a lag. So the growth today might be felt tomorrow and the day after. So I think the biggest message this panel should, the biggest thing or the best thing these people can do here, the politicians, our policy makers, is to make Kenyans believe that tomorrow is better than today. Because if we can make Kenyans have some optimism, there's no reason why this country's economy cannot turn around.
Okay. Alexander, you clearly stated that in the past you have been making submissions even to the Finance Committee that is spearheaded by Molo Member of Parliament Kimani Kuria. In terms of the submissions that you'll be making before that committee when they're considering the finance bill of this financial year, what measures as TISA are you going to put in that particular presentation so that it can reflect what the professor is talking about here? The people on the ground can feel it.
Okay, thank you. Let me start from where the professor has stopped and indicate that as much as we economists, we are saying things are looking up at the macro level. If you look at what the citizens are saying, there's a report released by Infotrack in December that indicates about 73% of households in Kenya are either in distress or struggling financially.
Yes.
Only 5% are coping with the current economic times. So as part of our submissions, we are requesting the Treasury and Parliament, as we consider the next finance bill or whatever they would bring, because you remember after the rejection of the finance bill, they came back with something called tax amendment laws and so on. But basically that was a finance bill in another name. What we are suggesting is, let us look at measures that are going to, yes, bring in revenue, but also stimulate economic growth. Because what we've seen, and these are one of our key submissions, what we've seen with the current government, taxation has two main roles. One of them is raising revenue for government.
Yeah.
The other one is stimulating economic growth. But the government has focused solely on revenue raising, and we've forgotten about the economy. And what we are suggesting is, let us have some measures that are going to reduce the cost of living. For instance, what would it hurt us if we, for instance, reduced VAT on petroleum products? That has an impact across the board. What would it hurt the economy if, for instance, we said any raw material that is coming from the East African region will be VAT exempt, and we also have it at zero import duty? Some of these raw materials are used for manufacturing feeds or animal feeds. And when we have a low cost of production at the farm level, the consumer will reap the benefits. And these are things that we can do. We can also even provide tax amnesties for what we call upcoming industries that are mainly in the rural areas. If you have companies that are setting up production plants in the rural areas, they will do two things. One, they'll create employment in those rural areas. They will also stimulate some demand for some services and goods within that rural setting. Why can't we provide some amnesties for those kind of investments? And also, further to that, we can also give them preferential tariffs, energy tariffs for the manufacturing sector, so that at the end of the day, we try and reduce the cost of producing these goods that go to the consumers. Finally, we are looking at essential goods that are imported. For instance, we have things like diapers, sanitary towels that are very sensitive. Last year, in the finance bill, you recall one of the issues that was there was imposing VAT on these products that are very essential. Why can't we find a way of these essential products that affect every household? We ensure that we reduce the taxes on them, so that then everybody has an incentive to actually purchase them. If you saw what was produced by ICA, the report that came out yesterday, it is pointing to a diminished demand. And I agree with Prof. That could be probably why we are seeing the inflation numbers going down, because people's purchasing power has been eroded so much. And if what we are seeing coming next month, an increase in the contribution to NSSF comes to effect, then a majority of Kenyans who are on payslip will be hurt. We are also saying implement what is in the national tax policy and the medium-term tax reform strategy. Just expand the tax base. Stop raiding on the guys who are already paying. And I think those of us who are on payslip are only about 3 million or thereabout.
Over 3 million. Yes.
So if we continue raiding these payslips, and these people are very few, let us find a way of implementing Article 201 of the Constitution, where there is fairness in the tax burden.
Okay, I'm coming to you, Vincent. Let me allow David. I'm going to give you an opportunity. David, you're talking that word that Alexander has just used, broadening that particular tax base to ensure they don't just focus on the people on the payslip, but others in the informal sector. Even a report from Infotrack and other polls institution clearly stated that people in the informal sector are even making more money than the people in the formal sector. So how does KRA come in to ensure that they also collect monies from the people in the informal sector?
And that is where we find a lot of challenges in terms of messaging, because the way our country operates, it seems it has singled out only the earners, those that are who own the payslips, as the main source of taxation, as opposed to reaching out to other avenues. I remember when the President Ruto administration started, he mentioned something to do with subsidy on production versus subsidy on consumption. So, meaning consumption, if you subsidize consumption, you are going to spend a lot of money trying to make sure people have goods on a low price, but then you are spending more. On production, you are injecting more capitation. You want a lot of funds into production so that we have plenty and available for taxation. In agriculture, for example, I think Kenya does well in agriculture, and there is a lot we can gain from agriculture if there is empowerment in that area. Now, KRA or people concerned with taxation should now come out of their comfort zone and try to make everybody understand that taxation is not only for people who are employed and salaried. Everybody that generates should pay tax. But now, if we are going to pay tax, how are we going to do this? That's why I said earlier, in terms of messaging, the political class hasn't favored the growth of our economy. Because every time an idea would come, I remember sometimes back there was noise about taxing the avocado and farm produce and something of that sort. And there was a lot of noise everywhere that you can't come and take tax from avocado farmers and everything else. But if we have a clear civic education where farmers, and every person understands that I have a role in whatever that I do, I need to contribute to the growth of my economy by paying my tax. Then it means the farmer who is not salaried, but they know at the end of the day they'll generate something from their production, they have to pay tax. And so I think it's about time we let the 3 million number to relax a bit and reach out to the bigger constituents that have a lot of resources, but probably no idea that you are being taxed or you are supposed to be taxed. Because people are paying tax, but then who is even giving us information about the taxes that are being paid in that area? Very little information shared. So expanding on the information, helping the people in the informal sector understand that they too have a bigger role to play in stabilizing this, and then helping or encouraging the political class, because unfortunately we are a political country and everything that happens in Kenya has politics around it. You can't talk about a finance bill without politicians shouting about it. You can't talk about taxation without somebody talking about politics. Like what Prof says, when you tell people economy is looking good, they tell you, but hakuna pesa kwa mfuko. So how do I know that the economy is doing well? So we need to find a better way where we differentiate both. We know that there is part to an ordinary consumer of this information. That's where the problem is.
Vincent, as you respond also, given that the over-reliance that have been, of course, exacerbated by my guests here, they're talking about in terms of KRA just focusing on people in the formal sector. What are the disadvantages of that, given that in the informal sector, the only time, for example, the taxman will interact with the people in the informal sector is when they go to the supermarkets, they buy produce where it is taxed by VAT at the end of the day, and at the petrol station. That is the only point of interaction they interact with the taxman.
I will give you a very direct answer based on that's relatable to you. We were invited to come for an interview at KBC. There was a flyer out, across that was distributed. But as we are having this conversation, if you walk across the street to Jivanji, he's a bunge la mwananchi. He's a speaker. They're having a conversation, and it's a very relatable conversation. So that's the difference between when you're discussing a tax policy. Who are the easy people to go for? So you like, I wouldn't have found a very close example in terms of public engagement between what we are doing here and what is happening at bunge la mwananchi. You'll actually be surprised that even the level of conversation and the examples given there could be, hey, I have come from this hotel this morning. Yesterday I bought tea this much. The idea is we are used to easy targets. So it's high time now we broaden this basket. And by the way, it's also good to appreciate when we are talking about taxation.
According to data,
KRA is not at a policy level. KRA is it's an agency. The people who are providing leadership when it comes to policy conversation is actually Treasury. KRA's contribution is from an experience. This is what we're experiencing, so that we vest responsibility where responsibility is vested. There's something I want to add to what my colleague was saying. We tax for 5 reasons. We tax to raise revenue, to redistribute this revenue. These people are having more money. Even the conversation of to redistribute this revenue may not be an interesting conversation, but it's part of the broader conversations when we are taxing. We also tax we also tax, you remember the Americans, no taxation without representation. Taxation provides a platform between those who the people, and also ensuring that the people have a voice in that process. That's why we have parliament. We also tax so that we can be repriced. Things like cigarettes, alcohol, ensuring that you protect people's health, and we address negative externalities. And then finally, we tax so that we can balance trade. Why am I saying this? Is that you cannot remove political conversation from a tax conversation. Even the finance bill next year, when we are discussing, Prof has just said, rain, oil, and politics. Those 3 issues, direct impact on our Kenyan economy. This is my recommendation. On my way here, I saw KBC at the gate, the national broadcaster. Yes. So let me speak to the nation in this situation. We have been speaking. Let me rephrase what I'm about to say. Okay. We are not talking with each other. We are talking to each other. If I had an opportunity to have a conversation, by the way, I think I'm speaking from a responsibility. I was supposed to be part of the technical team doing the audit on public debt. We were taken to court. We'll be coming to that and I want to speak to this issue that my recommendation to the Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury, Honorable John Badi, is we need a convention similar to the Bomas Convention on Katiba to discuss the economy. Whereby, for example, the Waziri can be able to say last year, this is the much that we raised. This is what we did with this money. This is the far that it would have gone. I remember one time a former Minister of Health, I think that was, she said one thing. He says, I may not be a medical expertise, but she told the people at the technical level at the ministry, if you explain to me the issues very well, I will be able to speak to these people in a language they understand. Yes. My brother, if we can only reduce talking to each other, like the way my friends, colleagues here have cited different reports, this one is saying, and we bring all this to the table. Because the reality of it is that we have a country to govern. The reason why you're hearing civil society speaking, you're hearing churches speaking, you're hearing government speaking, is that people are concerned about the country. But we need to translate our concern into action. And the easiest way of doing this, how I wish, for example, the Treasury, our colleagues in Treasury, will convene a 3 days national conversation. The first day, let's hear what is the magnitude of the problem. Then number two, we hear what is being done about this problem, and then what is working, what does not work. I learned from project implementation. We are so quick to celebrate success, but do you know there are many lessons that are buried in failure. We also need to have the courage to say, Prof, this has not worked because of 1, 2, 3, and these are the lessons we've learned, and this is how we will improve things. I can tell you, the finance bill last year, if we were to be truthful to each other, was only a galvanizing front. There were deeper issues that the country needed to confront. For example, the issues of youth unemployment. Yes. So if we can convene for 3 days and we address these issues, I can tell you, just the way the Constitution today is quoted as a uniting document, even things like finance bills, things like economic growth, could actually begin to be platforms for national unity, because people can see, okay, so this is where we are headed, this is our role, and then this is how we will hold each other accountable. And we move from speaking to each other and speak with one another.
And of course, Prof, as you pick it up from Mr. Vincent there, talking about communication, which was the major issue that was raised, not just by the government, by the civil societies, human rights organizations, as well as the churches. If, let's say, for example, hypothetically, the CS for Treasury holds that a particular 3-day convention at the Bomas of Kenya, what language will they use, given that you witnessed what our previous cabinet secretaries were doing? Some of them were professors. At the end of the day, they were people who are represented in high organizations. What language, so that they can bridge that language barrier to make the people understand? Yes, because it is a major language barrier. If you use what we call jargons at the end of the day, so that people cannot understand what you're saying. So to make it simple for the people who are going to be taxed at the end of the day can understand, if we take this money, this is what we're going to do with it.
I think that's a very simple question. But before I go to your question, let me react a bit to my colleagues. Is the economy doing well or not doing well? Let's start by talking the language of the Mwananchi. For example, I'm sure you are all members of WhatsApp groups. What is the major activity in WhatsApp groups nowadays? It's raising money. Yes. That's a very good indicator that the economies are doing very well. So everybody is a member of WhatsApp group, but they don't know what is GDP and so on. So we must talk the language of the Mwananchi. Look at the number of businesses that are crossing. If you tell somebody that GDP has gone down from 5% to 4%, they don't get it. But if you ask them whether they have a neighbor or a relative who has closed the business, they don't understand it. And number 3, how many Kenyans want to migrate from this country? Very many. In fact, for the first time in the last 20 years, I've seen people circulating in WhatsApp groups the US lottery. It had gone dead. That means that people are not very satisfied with the economic performance. So if we want people to act and do what they're supposed to do, then we must talk in their language. I know economists like Kimosop and others like using equations and exotic things. You may not be aware.
Use equations.
You may not be aware. But let's talk the language of the people.
Yes.
I'll give you one more example.
Yes.
During COVID-19, and he has talked about it, the government came up with an economic stimulus package. And it worked very well. In fact, if you look at KRA data, they did not collect less tax because the tax rates went down. And that was a very good experiment. So why don't we look at what has worked and we show the examples to the 190 to ordinary people. This has worked and it can work. So for example, everybody knows that if one way to stimulate the economy is actually to cut the taxes. And Kimosop and others will tell you, worldwide we stimulate the economy by cutting taxes. Why not doing that? In fact, my hunch has always told me that if you cut the tax rate, VAT, from 16 to 12 or 13, you would probably collect more taxes. But is anybody politically bold enough to do that? So let's talk the language that people understand. One more thing is we are talking about making more money. Why don't we make more money by exporting? Nobody talks much about the export market. The Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans have made money, expanded the economy by looking at the export market. Kenya is 55 million people, but the planet has 7 billion people, 8 billion people. Why don't we focus on that bigger market? So maybe one way to talk the language of the people is to talk the language of the money. That is why you have Kimosop and others will tell you, I have neighbors who have not been to school, they can't talk English, but they know how to count money. So one way to make people understand what you're telling them is to use the language of the money. Or even use the politician's language. For example, President Ruto has been talking about the broad-based government. Why are we not talking about the broad-based taxation regime? Now everybody knows about broad-based government. Why don't we talk about the broad-based taxation rate? Finally, to make people understand this complex language, it's very simple. If you showed Kenyans where their tax goes, they'll even queue to pay taxes. But
I'll give you an opportunity.
we all pay taxes, but we really don't know where that tax goes. Not because it is not always put into good use, but not well explained. And finally, I like your idea, and I want to modify. No taxation, no representation. Why don't you make it even easier? Use the language of the people. And I am not representing any politician.
Okay.
By paying taxes, you actually become a shareholder of this country.
Okay.
We need
Alexander.
more shareholders in this country.
Wait.
Yes, that is it.
Wait. Let me give Alexander that opportunity to respond to what Prof has just said. Given that you do know, I won't say it on national television, but not so many people want to pay taxes. That is the reality at the end of the day. Especially those in the informal sector, they will find ways to ensure that they evade the tax man. No, wait.
No, because what happens,
Yes.
I'll tell you, I spend quite some time in tax justice in this conversation. What you're talking about is called tax motivation, the motivation to pay taxes. The reason why those people in the informal sector don't want to pay taxes are very simple. They will tell you, and allow me to use Kiswahili. Sasa sisi tunalipa kanjo ama tunalipa county hii pesa na hata hii chafu hawaokoti, soko sio safi. It is the issue has always been the motivation. If people can see clearly where their money is, because you will go to the county, they will tell you very clearly that wacha niseme nitoke kwa sababu we are discussing an issue because my brother, we can condemn the informal sector.
No, we're not condemning. We're not condemning. We're just saying Kenyans have a smart way of evading the tax man. That is the reality on the ground, Vincent. Or is it not?
The data shows that if people can see clearly what their money is going, I've just given you the example of the market. If the toilet is clean, the garbage is collected, it's secure, it is well lit, they can do their market in the morning. There was an experiment that was done in this big market on your way to this town, before you get to because you get to Nyeri, the Karatina market. And if you allow me to use that example, there's a young man who he just looked at those young the mamas there in the market, and he realized that they are spending a lot of time selling. They don't have the time to go to the bank. And this young man just told them, for every, I will be going, I don't want to mention the name of the bank, but it's a Kenyan bank. I will be going in the morning, and I'll be going at lunchtime to the bank. And what I'll be doing is that mine is, I just come with a slip, and then you know the way you know how to just fill in the form, and then you sign. My work is to go and deposit for you. And when I bring back the deposit slip, you pay me 10 shilling for every transaction. Do you know that model grew to a place whereby the young man was given an agency by the bank, because the bank realized this young man is coming always at this time, and he explained his model of business. And I can tell you today that ecology. So people in economics, people respond to incentives. What incentives are we giving them so that then they can be able to be paying taxes? Okay,
we'll be circling to that, given that we have witnessed the major corruptions that have even been cited by KRA, even the Treasury, in terms of funds being lost, in terms of the funds that are being collected with the exchequer. Some cannot be accounted for. We witnessed reports by the Control of Budget, the Auditor General as well. We'll be getting to that. But that is the question that I was asking. Vincent has just answered for you. But how do you motivate Kenyans not to evade the taxman, and at the end of the day to make sure what Professor is saying, to become shareholders of this country?
Thank you very much. From where we see it as TISA, Kenyans have no problem paying taxes. And our view as TISA and our Okoa Uchumi coalition partners is we do not have a revenue problem in this country. What we have is an expenditure problem. And the problem that the Kenyan is having, and the reason why they would have that motivation to evade or avoid tax, is because we pay our taxes, but what we are seeing is lavish living among our political class. And we are asking ourselves, what would hurt if we even reduced the size of our government? For instance, let me give you two good examples. Why do we need 2 state departments in the Ministry of Health? We have had one Ministry of Health with 1 state department with 1 PS for a long time, and we've done very well. Why do we need 2 state departments in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Actually, even their roles are duplicating. Why can't we reduce the size of our government by reducing the overheads? Because, by the way, we blame the civil servants, and they are suffering like all of us. Their pay slips, it's only that they don't have a voice. But for us as TISA, we speak for everyone. They are suffering. Look at their pay slips. They are suffering. But the problem is not with the technocrats. By the way, they do a very good job. The problem is up there. And that is where the parks are huge. And we can reduce this. This just takes just a pen from the president himself. He signs a new executive order and reduces the state departments from, I don't know, 51 to around 30 that are feasible. Because some of these ministries, some of the state departments, you don't even know what investment promotion does that trade doesn't do. You don't know what industry does that MSME is now required to come. For instance, why do we have a whole department dealing with maritime transport, a state department, and we have another state department dealing with transport? Transport is transport, whether it is in the air, or on road, on rail, or on water. We should have all of them as one. That way, we will reduce the expenditure, and we will also reduce the vested corruption in procurement. Because if you have all these entities, then each entity will be a procuring entity. And we know most of the corruption in our country happens in procurement. Yes. So if we reduce the entities that are doing procurement, essentially, we would see a direct reduction in the level of corruption. And to add on the report that came out of AACC yesterday, you saw KRA was actually at the top of the list of institutions that are highly corrupt. So my view is we can come up with administrative measures that would ensure that we reduce leakage Anyone in this country, we know our friends. Anybody who has a friend who works for KRA, not all of them. There are some good people.
We cannot ascertain that.
Yeah.
That is your view.
Yeah, it's my view.
Yes.
But there are some of us who have friends. You know a friend who works for KRA. The things they do and the salaries they get, even if we don't know their pay slips, are not directly related. And at times we wonder, where did we go to school? We are all economists, and at times we don't earn as much. There are things that I will see Prof here doing, and I'll say, yeah, due to his age and the number of years he has worked, that's okay. But somebody at my age, there are things that I'll see them doing, and I know what they do, and then I'll ask questions. So we should deal with such things. And then the other issue, maybe I don't know whether we'll come to that, is the debt level. And Prof had mentioned, when you look at now, the domestic debt is actually outcompeting external debt. And what that tells you is that we are crowding, the government is crowding out private sector. And if you look at the numbers in the BPS, you will see that lending to private sector has been dipping. And this is very strange. It has come down from 13% all the way to 4% and going down. That tells you there is a problem. We don't have enough money to invest. And if we are not investing, then we'll have a problem with our revenue side. So let us work on expenditure side, because revenue is not a problem. Yeah.
And now, David, we're talking about in terms of creating a good environment for the investors who come to the country, because the major issue that was raised within even the finance committee, given that I was there, some of the experts were clearly stating that the uncertainty it creates around the economy itself, given that the government, year in, year out, they need to find ways, areas to tax. So to create a stable environment so that investors can come into the country with a mind of stability at the end of the day, what areas should be improved on?
Thank you. For starters, there is something my colleagues have alluded to, motivation to pay tax.
Yes.
It is true, majority of people, not only in Kenya, many people don't like paying taxes. Most people would love to be given free things, and that is why you'd realize today, let me talk of Kenya, many people who get an opportunity to serve in government, they see it as an opportunity to loot from the government.
We cannot ascertain that as well.
We can actually, we know that we have cases of corruption.
Yes.
We have cases of corruption. I've had scenarios where you would hear people, we had a report from EACC.
Yes,
we have guys who have unexplained wealth. You know what somebody is earning. You know what somebody is earning.
I'll give you an opportunity.
But then looking at, like what he just said, looking at the kind of the lifestyle the person lives versus what they earn, they do not relate. So you realize that explains why we have cases of corruption. So how are we going to make that investor feel comfortable? There was one famous ambassador, US ambassador sometimes back, who used to say the character of thieving. In Kenya, there is a lot of thievery that happens, that whenever people find an opportunity, then they want to get opportunities to benefit themselves instead of benefiting the economy of a nation. Should we have a scenario or an environment where everybody that finds an opportunity to serve sees it as an opportunity to better the environment, not only for me, but for other people who do not have the opportunity or privilege to serve in the capacity that I'm serving? That is one. Number two, I think I go back to the point of messaging. I do not want to agree a little bit with the shareholding narrative, because it has messed us a little.
Because of politics.
Yes, it has really caused us.
Unless it's misinterpreting.
No. I'm not misinterpreting. I'm just running away from it. I'm avoiding the word because it has brought some consequences. But my thinking would be a better broadcast, because it is now patriotism. Yes. So you realize that if we had an environment where we have forums for people to understand why exactly do we need to pay tax. I love the regime of the former President Kibaki. When KRA did a lot of sensitization, people knew whenever you are going to pay tax, you knew why you are paying tax. They told us kulipa ushuru ni kujitegemea, and we could see what the revenue was doing. We pay tax, There was free education, which was real free. There were things that were happening that everybody could say, because of this, I'll pay tax. So I think it's about time that we start, KRA starts going back to the roots of making sure they make people understand the messaging. Don't make it look like lazima ulipe ushuru, usipolipa tunakufunga. You know, so after I pay, what happens? Let people know that when I pay, it is going to serve me back and help my economy. That will actually make an investor more comfortable and any other person desire to know even how to pay tax, even if they do not want to. So I think messaging is very critical. The institutions in place should take a responsibility to try as much as possible to make the taxpayer and every actor in the sector to understand the value behind paying the tax and what are the results. Can we have the resources accounted for? The thieving thing and corruption should be checked seriously.
Vincent, as you respond, transparency, accountability, that is what Kenyans are yearning for, isn't it?
Yes, the beauty is, I don't know what happens at times. I have worked in government and I have been in places whereby we know where you're able to make decisions and say, hey, tomorrow morning this is what we want to do. I think if the issue of voter education, not the taxpayer education, is a combined effort, both by the policy making organ, which is Treasury, together with the implementing agency like KRA. But also this is not just a responsibility of the national government. Even county governments need to have these responsibilities of educating, engaging people, showing people results. The other thing that we also need to appreciate, colleagues, is that we also are living in a very informatized society. People have information. Yes. I think I have one of the things that I'm very proud about our country. We are discussing our issues. Yes. I'll tell you, if you move around Africa or even to other countries, this level of engagement, like people know the finance bill is going to come on this day. This is what it's going to do. So what I also think is that the apparatus and the tools that those in duty bearers need to also sharpen their tools to move with the times, because people need to be engaged on Twitter. People need to be engaged on YouTube. People need to be engaged, even including, I think, even government departments. Because if you go and speak to the people in a language that they can understand, the data shows you very clearly that people can engage. Allow me to say the benefits of. The benefits of accountability, the benefits of transparency. For example, for us who were in Nairobi before Thika Road was dualed or made to be a superhighway as it is, we can clearly see what that superhighway has done. Just between Globe and all the way to Thika Town, you have more apartments that have come in, you have malls that have come in, you have investments. There is a direct correlation between what the road has done. We also know the experiences and the jams that were on Thika Road before it was used. If, for example, the Kenya Roads Board came out clearly and said, Thika Road, for it to be been completed, this is the money that was spent, this is the company that was responsible, this is the loan that we borrowed, and this is where we are paying. I can tell you clearly, people will have no problem, even when it comes to the government engaging and borrowing more. So I think at the moment, the elephant in the room is an issue of communication. And you know what, since we are in a media house, I have said this in the past, and even in a past interview, maybe possibly with you, is that where communication stops, imagination take over. And what people imagine, you have no control over. So to those in Treasury, to those in KRA, in key government policy organs, is that we have a communication issue, that breakdown. And when we have to, and at times, you know, communication breakdown does not mean you do not know what to do. I have realized, I think it's not a confidence issue. It is a connection issue. And when people connect with the proposals that are being proposed in a way that will better their lives, what is going to happen? They are more likely to support. And then finally, allow me to use an example I saw in Singapore. When you talk to their civil servants, they can show you clearly what their service in government is doing to promote investment, and also what the government has done to facilitate them to be better workers. For example, they say, if I'm a civil servant, these are my benefits. I'm going to do this, I'm going to get this. That has also a way of positively injecting a better and a higher tax morale among the populace. And then centralized information. We have Huduma centers. You see the Huduma Center for coordinating services at national level. But if you want to know a lot of information around taxation, where do you go to? Where is a central place? So such could be part of the innovations that needs to be deployed.
Okay. Prof, I'm coming to Alexander is itching there. Let's give him that opportunity. And then at the coming day, you can now respond.
I just wanted to add something that he mentioned. As TISA and together with KHRC, we did take a case to court, and we are asking Treasury to submit to us or release to us all the debt agreements. And our view was, if we get these debt agreements, we can do a computation of who do we owe against which project. This case was ruled on the 14th of December, and government was given 45 days to submit these documents. It lapsed yesterday. We've not received anything. This would have been very useful for us. Had we been given this information, we would have analyzed our debt position, and then we tell the Kenyans that the debts that government is saying we are repaying is meant for A, B, C, D. Because what he has said is very profound. When you don't provide this information, then you provide room for guesswork. So right now, what we are told when we say, where is our revenue going? We are told it's going to paying debt. But given that we don't have access to this information, there is no transparency and accountability, it is left to us to guess. And now that is where now the whole issue of politics comes in. So my view is, could we get this information? And for us, we are willing to do the analysis, and we have a whole department that can do that, and we will provide this information to the public and say, it is correct, what government is saying is correct, that we are paying all these debts and they have done this, or it is not correct, and therefore we seek for accountability from the duty bearers. Okay.
Prof, as you respond, given that civic education has been the bone of contention here, and you are a professor at a high institution here, the University of Nairobi. We do know that in institutions, even when I was learning, we were told about the taxman, what he does, what he collects, and at the end of the day, where the revenue is supposed to go to. Should it start at an early age where we see them inculcated into the competency-based curriculum at the lower level?
I don't know whether I should start with that or comment.
Okay, you can respond first and then you can...
Let me comment on what they have said, then I'll probably finish with this, because it's a very good question from my own experience. Now, if you remember when Generation Z was demonstrating on the streets of Nairobi, I don't remember anybody saying we don't want to pay taxes. That one I can remember. Or they said we want to know where our taxes go. And a good example is Sweden. I've just checked online here. Tax rate is 52.2%. But I've never had Swedish demonstrating on the streets. So all of you are saying one thing. If you can connect tax and where it goes, that's the best incentive to make people pay taxes. Number two, on transparency. Anytime I have a transaction in the bank, I always see a message here. So why don't we have such a system? We have Safaricom and other systems here, so that anytime the government spends money, a message comes to my phone. That 5 shillings have been paid on that, 5 shillings have been paid on that. It's our money. So I think there's a lot of focus on correcting the money, but there's not enough focus on where that money goes. And that would be a very good way to make this expenditure very transparent. Now, when I go to your question, civics education, I think 2003 or 2004, I visited an American classroom, grade 5. If you remember 2005, that's when you're having civic education, because you wanted a new constitution. In this grade 5, I found the students, grade 5, reciting the preamble to the American Constitution. So at that early age, they can't run about the American civic system, about voting, about the constitution, about balance of power, about all those things. So if you want Kenyans to vote, to be transparent, to do all that, we must start early. It is too late now. If you start taking Kimosop or my friend here for civic education, I don't think you are doing something right. So why don't we get this civic education and incorporate it in our system? And it's not just civic education, even entrepreneurship, even science, even innovation. The earlier you get into the kids, the more they internalize it, and the more they grow up with it. Now, if you look at all these guys, the most disciplined one here, I don't know who it is. It is the one who was disciplined earliest in his life.
Okay, Prof.
If I start disciplining, now it's too late.
Okay,
so I think we can incorporate it CBC
Okay.
and the other facets of our academic journey, so that we internalize all that.
Okay, Prof. That concludes our first hour. Of course, this stimulating conversation will continue into the second hour. We are also keeping an eye on various events that are happening across the country, and we'll duly inform you. Let's pay some bills, and then we'll come back.
Ni kuvuka mpaka. Nitavuka hadi boda. Mundi, makinika. Kwa jua au kwa mvua, tusitafutane. Utalaumiwa wewe.
Mimi siogopi lawama.
Ondoka wewe. Ondoa marondo yako hapa.
Ukweli upi?
Kalume amekuja kuniambia mimba ulionayo ni yake.
Nini?
Ningependa turudi kama ilivyokuwa zamani. Tushirikiane.
Kwa lipi?
Muone madui zangu wanatumia huko kutengana kwetu
10 p.m. on KBC Channel 1 TV.
Tunakuletea the biggest reggae party in 254 in a yard extra niceness of reggae music,
Extra dose of entertainment.
when the thing is nice
We have to do it twice.
Wellness is important in our daily lives, so that instead of just surviving, we should be thriving.
Ways to prevent a stroke or heart attack is for you to know what conditions you have by regular checkup. People don't know they have hypertension. They don't know they have diabetes.
I was pre-diabetic. I was afraid of getting life.
Every day, a healthy day.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. Our topic is still out on the economic outlook as well as the cost of living, given that that will inform how the government will be collecting taxes in the financial year of 25-26. Also, keeping tabs on a function that is currently ongoing at the coast, where the CS, that is Deborah Baraza, is currently attending. You saw her yesterday there. It is a health workers workshop, and of course we'll duly inform you in the course of this particular broadcast as and when we get that particular link. Also, as I told you earlier on, the ICT CS, that is William Kabogo, was attending a function here in the capital. As and when we get that particular link, we'll be sharing as well. Talk to us on our social media platforms at KBC Channel 1 and at Abdiaziz Hashim 2. Now let me go back to my panelists who are still here with me. The issues of communications have been covered in terms of creating environment for investors so that they can come into the country and ensure that we spur growth as well as create employment has been addressed as well. In terms of did we learn our lesson, let me go now to David, given that I did not give you an opportunity before we took a short commercial break. We saw what happened last year. Treasury now will be coming with another finance bill on the table. Will the, are you projections? I just want you to project. Are we sure they will learn from the lessons of last year?
with due respect, I want to disagree with Prof in a few things.
Okay.
One, when you say people who demonstrated did not say they don't want to pay tax, the issue is they did not say they don't want to pay tax, but clearly, if you say we don't want finance bill, it means we are not going to deal with it. We don't want it. Meaning people are against that policy and everything else. And I still stand with my position that majority of people will find a reason not to want to pay taxes. That is the fact. And that's why going back to what happened during the COVID-19 when the government brought forward some tax measures.
Yeah, stimulation packages.
You realize very many people are excited. I remember people saying, you know, the government has should go this direction. But by all means, we can't run away from the reality that somebody must pay the bills.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody must pay the bills, and that is why we wake up every morning to go out and work so that we go meeting our daily needs. So for starters, I want all of us to agree that as a people, we must agree that a nation that is progressive must find a way of generating its own wealth. We must generate our wealth. And how do we do it? We do it through paying taxes and now creating an environment where one word that I feel we are all agreeing on is accountability. The resources generated, the taxes paid, are we putting it to the proper use? I think the lessons we need to learn from the previous, and if we've failed to learn from that, it would cost us painfully this one, is have we put into consideration all the concerns that were raised prior to the former? One, I've been speaking about the messaging. I think we need to move from the boardroom conversations where a committee somewhere sits and then they bring these projections and say this is how we want to do it. Somebody said yesterday the government is so obsessed with this thing of we have a budget of 4 trillion, 4.7 trillion and all that. We need to run away from that aspect and come say, even if it is 2.5 trillion, but this is what we project the 2.7 is going to do. In terms of infrastructure, this is what we expect. In terms of employment, this is what we want. In terms of, you know, we want to see that this cuts across. He spoke to something about a nation that is at 50, is it 51%? 52. And you know, they are not complaining because people know if I have paid for a pen, I'm going to get a pen. You don't pay for a pen and then you get something that looks like a pen, but it's not a pen. So we would want an environment where the government then wakes up to a reality. And for example, now we have a very serious concern with education system in Kenya, where until yesterday, schools were talking about decapitation and so many other things that are happening, that the resources are not yet in schools, despite the fact that the government said they had released a long time ago. So you realize there is a problem in terms of how well do we communicate to a client who is now supposed to service this bill, that is a taxpayer. Do we make them understand? Do we make them feel that the resources they are giving is put up to the use? So learning from the previous lessons, I think we are still a little bit far because to this point, from my own personal observation, the government hasn't done much to even engage the people who are against the previous finance bill. Right now, what has been happening, they're just trying to modify and try to see how are we going to convince people to accept what would happen and how we move forward. So if you asked me, I think we are yet to learn, and it might cost us, yes, but then, you know, when you are in a society where too much noise making is what calls the shots, then probably we might just have to embrace the noise making.
Can I say something?
Okay. Before you speak, let me take our viewers live to an event that is currently ongoing. Then I'll give you an opportunity. I saw you laughing, of course. I will give you an opportunity to respond to David. Now I want to take you to Mombasa County. The Health Summit continues, and let's listen in to the conversation that is happening there. You do know that the Health Cabinet Secretary, that is Deborah Baraza, was there yesterday. Let's listen in to the conversations at that Health Summit at the coastal city.
During yesterday's discussions, yesterday we set the tone for the summit, outlining objectives and stressing the significance of advancing regional health security. There was a leadership commitment to advancing health security in the region and discussions on regional health security priorities, and we reflected on lessons learned during COVID-19, what went well, what went less well, among other outbreaks, and emphasized on building resilient communities during this. There were also discussions on the role of private sector, discussions on the role of the National Public Health Institute, which is critical for better pandemic preparedness and sustainability. Again, discussions on biosecurity and bioterrorism in East Africa. There were conversations on big data and AI in healthcare, and discussions on the role, transformative role of data and AI, which is now currently one of the big agendas where we are rolling out digital health. We hope to have 100% digitalization of our health system in Kenya. Equally, we had sessions on academia and research, which highlighted the importance of academic institutions in fostering innovations and building capacity in health security. And so, this summit serves as a call of action on health security, urging partners to move beyond discussions and turn towards commitments into tangible actions for a healthier, more resilient region. And so my pleasure to welcome you, Your Excellency, to address the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. Thank you very much. Waziri Deborah Baraza, Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Health, Kenya, heads of delegation here, the CDC Deputy Director, the WHO Country Director, Amit, and my good friend Emmanuel, and all attendees. Good morning. Let me begin by saying that I'm happy to be together with you today. I do not intend to take up much of your time. It's not my business to take up your time. You are the guys who are planning for the future. We have done our part. So ninimalize niende nikafanya yangu ya nyumbani na nyinyi muendelee. But let me begin by appreciating through you, Dr. Davis, the University of Nebraska and your entire team for inviting us to come and join you and to give some of our perspectives that could hopefully give our continent the ability to take charge of its health sector in collaboration with other international organizations, but more importantly with our own organizations such as our Africa CDC, as is represented here. And I'd like just to go back a little bit and recall the year 2020, which was the beginning of a very difficult time for us as a country, for the world, but also for me individually. When our world basically came to a standstill, taking everybody by complete surprise and forcing nations to begin to ask themselves when this pandemic would actually arrive at our respective doorsteps. As president at the time, and in consultation with my cabinet, we found it prudent, well before the disease was found within our borders, to set up the National Emergency Response Committee on Coronavirus. The role of this committee, chaired by the then Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe, was to help steer the country and to navigate the uncertain season with an emphasis on coordinating capacity building of medical personnel and other professionals to enable our country to respond quickly and effectively to any suspected cases or outbreak of the virus that would occur or could occur at that time anywhere in the Republic. Other roles of this committee included enhancing of surveillance at all our points of entry, preparation of national and county private isolation and treatment facilities, because we began by having immediate sessions, and I convened an immediate session with the Council of Governors to work on this. We began to coordinate the supply of testing kits that would be critical, looking out for medical products, supplies, pharmaceuticals, and masks, and other protective gear that were available within the Republic, as well as identifying isolation and treatment facilities, as you heard a little bit from Amit, who spoke before me. And all this we did knowing that sooner or later we would be confronted by the coronavirus. And all these measures we put in place in the month of February 2020, and indeed, as fate would have it, on the 13th of March the same year, we got our first ever COVID-19 case, a 27-year-old woman who had just traveled to Kenya from London. This, ladies and gentlemen, marked the beginning of a long year, not only in the health sector, but throughout all sectors of Kenya's economy. It affected us economically, socially, and as of all of you know, our Kenyan culture is founded on community, on gatherings, and these, unfortunately, became the first casualties. For we had to ban all public gatherings. We did initially give reprieve to churches and businesses at large because we were worried about what would happen to all those who were employed and working in these various sectors. But again, unfortunately, within no time, it became impossible to keep that going. And we had to pull the plug totally on all in-house kind of gatherings and proceeded to institute a total lockdown of the country. This was a very bitter pill for Kenyans to swallow, but it was a necessary measure to help curb the virus and protect the people of Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just highlight just some of the key measures that we took. Some of them, again, have been mentioned by some of the speakers before me, so I will not bother elaborating. But the first of these, as has been stated, was communication. Poor communication results in confusion. And as we all know, communication during such a season as COVID was very important. Keeping the people informed and giving hope as they wondered what would happen next. So as a government, we agreed that the National Emergency Response Committee would be solely responsible for all forms of communication around the pandemic. And to this end, I authorize that only the Cabinet Secretary for Health would speak on behalf of the government on all matters related to COVID to avoid any kind of misunderstanding or misinformation, and he became the single source of truth, so to say, about measures on the disease. The only other communication that was permitted was from yours truly, who would speak from time to time when landmark decisions needed to be made, especially those related to the lockdown, economic stimulus, and calls for calm, and so on. And as many of you will recall, I did endeavor in a good number of times to ensure that during those occasions, I was also flanked by leaders of the opposition to further reassure Kenyans that this was truly a national crisis. We did realize that this did contain the pandemic and the panic, especially in these times of social media, but it also ensured that as a government, we controlled the narrative. With regard to health, occasioned by the big number of COVID patients, it became imperative for us to upgrade a good number of our health facilities to help with patient control. The public sector, private sector, as well as our military, all joined forces in handling the ballooning number of patients. As a government, we went ahead and put in resources, redid and rejigged our budget in order to be able to build additional hospitals and to increase the capacity of existing medical facilities. We also, at the time, knew that we were not financially prepared and we needed to source funding for us to be able to deal or take the measures that we needed to take. And this happened, and as again has been said, one of the main challenges of the lockdown was that it resulted also in our revenue collections dwindling at a time when the country needed these resources the most. And we had to grapple consistently with how we were going to finance our operations, but at the same time keep the nation moving. So as a government, we created a COVID-19 fund, a kitty that would fund emergency response towards containing the spread, its effects and impacts. But we also said in sharing the burden occasioned by this pandemic, we said we had to lead from the front, and myself as president and the deputy president took an immediate salary cut of 80% of our salaries. Cabinet secretaries, I don't know whether they were happy or not, but I ordered that they take 30% cuts. And principal secretaries and other top officials, we gave them the chance to volunteer to take 20% pay cuts in order to show that commitment and leadership starts at the top. We also called on well-wishers, and in this regard, I really want to thank our Kenyan private sector, because despite the challenges that they themselves were facing, they came out strongly in support to ensure that at least the most vulnerable were able to put food on their tables. This especially because a huge part of our Kenyan workforce was casual. And many of our urban citizens rely on a daily income to sustain themselves. And we recognize this.
Well, that is the former head of state, President Uhuru Kenyatta, who is just expounding or recounting the 2020 era where we experienced the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, it was a global phenomenon. He's just expounding on how the government was able to deal with it. And that is why he's calling for the collaboration among international and continental organizations, of course, working closely with the African CDC to combat such phenoms whenever they arise. And of course, the president also talking about the critical key thing at that time was communication. He did not allow room for misinformation, and that is why he allowed only the Health Cabinet Secretary then, who is now the Agriculture Cabinet Secretary, Mutahi Kagwe, to speak on the government's behalf. And of course, on few occasions, we were witnessing the former Commander-in-Chief coming to address the populace. But our conversation continues. We're still focusing on the cost of living as well as the economic outlook for the year 2025. I wanted to give Vincent an opportunity to respond to what David was talking about in terms of the lessons we learned from the previous finance bill.
I see. I'm just coming in after such an address.
Yes.
Because pretty much from an economic perspective, we are still reeling from the effects of COVID-19. And
yes.
You know, I had been accused by Prof not to be using figures and equations, but allow me to say this.
No, complicated ones.
Hold on. I think today we have held a conversation that everybody's read. We have what you call business cycles, whereby from when a business begins until it makes profits, grows, challenges to the age of maturity. So businesses that really struggle from COVID-19, I believe we are still reeling from the effects of COVID-19 until where we are at today. So I want to say that lessons we learned from COVID-19, as I said, purely if people are communicated and are talked in a language that they can understand, you know what's going to happen? People are going to engage. Because you realize we are not discussing should we have a finance bill or not. We're having a conversation of we need a finance bill that works for us. Okay. And why I raised my hand,
just a few minutes, I do hear your microphone has an issue. Let's try and sort it. Let me come back to Professor. Professor, we've heard from the former head of state clearly stating that the economy at that time suffered severely, and true to what Vincent is saying, we're still reeling from the effects of that particular COVID-19 pandemic. But the president clearly stated that the stimulation packages that were issued at that time quite helped Kenyans. So in that particular scenario, what other lessons can we draw from those stimulation packages that were issued and, of course, used in the current financial year?
I think earlier in the year I talked about the need for having a stimulus package in the current situation. And I guess the issue of stimulus package is borrowed from the American system. Americans are always talking about economic stimulation. Probably this is what the former head of state learned from his studies in the US where he studied. But I think his stimulus package worked. I remember he cut VAT, he cut the corporate tax rate, he made sure that the debts were paid. And those are lessons we can apply even today. Because it was a very good experiment and they worked. So if they worked, why can't we do that now? The only problem is the government is always reluctant to do experiments. But that was a free experiment. So if they worked that time, why can't we apply now? And they can work. And that's why I'm talking about having or cutting the tax rate. That will help bring more people or will make more people more compliant. It's like a good example, an extreme one. If I'm driving on the highway and the police stop me for speeding, they tell me, we're going to charge you 3,000 for speeding, and you can pay by M-Pesa, and I'm in Naivasha, I'll probably pay very quickly. But if they tell me we are going to take you to court, you have to come back from Nairobi to Naivasha, so can I pay you a bill, can you pay just 5,000? I'll probably be tempted to pay the bribe because it's too expensive. And it's the same with tax. Let's make it very easy to pay taxes. Let's make it bring incentives. And one of them is to make sure that the tax burden is not big in terms of rates and in terms of the number of people paying it. That's why I agree with all of you that we need a broad-based tax regime. That more people of us pay taxes, the burden becomes easier, we don't complain. And most important, I'll keep on saying, let's see where that tax goes.
And broad-based tax regime and broad-based accountability and communication of the same. So that, particularly when it comes to the results, because if we do that, Kenyans would be able to see this is what this work did not work. And I think even just listening to the speech by the former president who spoke before us, at the core of the invitation to this global summit, we may not have the details, but we are able to speculate is, hey, we had a crisis. Can we ask the person who was in charge of the country to come and tell us what worked, what didn't work, which decisions? And I've just picked some certain items. One, he said, we heard there was going to be a problem. We needed to prepare. Number two, I needed to consult my team, and also when I was communicating at some point, I needed to be flanked by the leaders from the opposition, because they are the leaders of the very people we are seeking to serve, so that there is legitimacy. So I think the same issue of the same issue with the taxation in the country, we just need to come to the table. When you were speaking and I requested for an opportunity to speak, was because if there is something that is today a symbol of national unity, is our constitution. As in, you will hear everybody across, even here, somebody has actually, my colleague from TISA has quoted the implementation of the public finance chapter of the constitution when it comes to taxation. I have a slide that I normally present when I'm summarizing the Kenyan constitution. The 260 articles, the six schedules, 18 chapters. I have one slide I summarize, and at the heart of that constitution, colleagues, is the Kenyan people. For me, if I was to summarize all the conversation we've had from the beginning until this period around the taxation, all that our colleagues in Treasury needs to do is the summary of all our taxation regimes, our policies, our revenue raising measures, is how do we put that Kenyan who is the taxpayer at the center, in terms of why they need to pay, the benefits of them paying, what this money will go to, what will it do to this Kenyan, and then the pain that this Kenyan will also incur, but also the pain we're incurring now, and the benefits in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. I can tell you, I remember when we were in school, colleagues, If you knew there was a mock examination, even there is a teacher here who could confirm, if we knew there was going to be, it used to be end-term exam, mock exam, then we go for the final exam. Most of us had different models. There are those who would study through the year, going to class on time, reading. Then there are those who would have the fun, and then they block themselves, and then they read. And there are also those who will read the previous night. Yes. In the morning on the way to a classroom, you make sure you don't encounter them, so that their framework and how they have understood things is not confused. The point is, there was a motivation, there was an examination that was coming. And we needed to...
Why don't you share your model?
Okay, I'm just saying that there was an exam that was coming up.
Yes.
And people knew the benefits of passing this examination, and they responded to it in different ways. I can tell you, if this 3-day, have proposed 3 days, so that in the first day where emotions are high, people from TISA and group can come and say we've not been heard, let them have their space. And then on the second day, when people now sober up and we listen to different perspectives, then on the third day we have resolutions. I can tell you, there is likelihood to be the momentum will change. And you know, the other thing that we'll also need to do is also periodically to be giving an account. In the human rights space which I've worked, we normally have accountability platforms where you have reports from government. You also give opportunities to non-state actors to share shadow reports that, whereas that is what government is saying, this is what we're saying. And all of them contribute. I was raised up country, and one of the things that I really miss when I'm in the city is my opportunities to be going to the forest. And you know, in the forest, one tree does not make a forest. It is the different trees. This country will be developed when all energies and synergies are built towards shaping and building the forest we so desire and would want to be part of.
Okay, Alexander and David, I'll give you an opportunity, but from the Global Health Summit, let me take you now here to the capital at Afya House for the weekly health update. Let's listen in, given that the health representative, that is Dr. Patrick Amoth, currently speaking. Let's listen in.
So that you become eligible for treatment in level 4 facilities and above, which is derived from your social health insurance component. We continue to onboard more health facilities into the health provider portal. And I want to report that cumulatively, from the 1st of October to date, more than 735,000 claims have been lodged on the system, equivalent to nearly 16.5 billion Kenya shillings. The leading intervention in terms of the claims is the inpatient services, of course. It is expected, followed by renal care services or dialysis services. More than 1 million Kenyans have been able to access treatment under the primary health care fund. This number has steadily been increasing, therefore making it a reality for us to be able to deliver Taifa care through the primary health care approach. We know primary health care systems tend to be comprehensive, they're integrated, they're inclusive, they promote equity, and therefore it becomes the bedrock of a strong healthcare system that can be able to withstand any shock thrown at it. In terms of empanelment and pre-authorizations, we continue with that process. We have, in the digital system, we have streamlined the pre-authorization process. In the defunct NHIF system, because healthcare workers work in a multidisciplinary team to be able to undertake interventions or procedures, in the previous system, because it was a manual system, it required all the members of the multidisciplinary team to provide one form of approval or the other for an intervention to be undertaken. We have streamlined that through the digital platform to ensure that the lead in an intervention is the only person undertaking the pre-authorization process. That lead person can be a clinical officer, it can be a medical officer, it can be a medical specialist. So for example, previously, if a mother required to undergo a cesarean section in a level 4 facility, you required the clinical officer anesthetist to provide a pre-authorization. You required the medical officer or the obstetrician doing the procedure to grant an authorization. Now we have said that the person who carries the highest responsibility in undertaking that procedure then provides the pre-authorization. It applies to clinical officers, to nurses, and to doctors across board, so there's no discrimination. In terms of specialist pre-authorizations, again, this will follow the same procedure based on approved scope of practice. I told you that we run our services through multidisciplinary teams, and each member of the team knows his or her role, when it starts and when it ends. I can give an analogy of the aviation industry. If you are taking a flight, there's a pilot who is in the overall control of the aircraft, but there's also a co-pilot who supports the pilot. There could be a flight engineer, there's the cabin crew, but all these teams work together to ensure a safe flight and a safe environment for you to be able to reach.
That is Dr. Patrick Amoth speaking at Afia House, informing us on the status update of Taifa Care. He has just confirmed that onboarding of facilities, health facilities that is, will continue, and of course it is progressing with over 735 facilities already onboarded, and of course clearly stating that more than 1 million Kenyans have already accessed the primary health care fund under the Social Health Authority. Of course, the empanelment is still ongoing. You do remember this was the bone of contention that was raised by the Kenya Union of Clinical Officers, who even at one point threatened to down tools. He clearly stated that there will be no discrimination of medical practitioners in this particular process, and that their facilities will be empaneled in regards to ensuring that all health facilities offering medical care to Kenyans will be, of course, empaneled through the new Social Health Authority. Our reporter Nancy Okware is currently attending that particular briefing and will brief us in our subsequent bulletin. Let's come back here to our studio, given that we're entering the final leg of our conversation. I want to go now to Alexander, given that our previous conversation we heard from the former head of state, that is President Uhuru Kenyatta, speaking about the incentives that they were able to offer Kenyans at that trying moment, clearly stating that you do know as Kenyans, socializing is one of our key components. Without socializing, at the end of the day, we do not converse on in terms of economy and businesses that we are engaging and venturing in. In this time around, if those incentives are available, which Vincent and Prof have clearly highlighted, if they will be there, are we expecting the numbers to grow in terms of Kenyans who are paying taxes?
Thank you for that good question. Our view as TISA is Kenyans have no problem paying taxes. And even, and I agree with Vincent, even during the Gen Z protests, the issue was not, the Gen Zs were not just rejecting the idea of paying taxes. The question is, how much are we paying? How much are we paying, and where is it going? So what we expect to see in the next few days, as Treasury prepares the finance bill or whichever instrument they are going to use, is a good communication of the incentives that they are providing to us as citizens. And what we have proposed as TISA is, could we bring down VAT, for instance, from 16% to 14%? We bring it down gradually. There has been a discussion in the EAC community for a convergence in terms of the VAT rates. Kenya has the lowest currently at 16%, and our neighbors are at 18%. So there has been this discussion of taking it to 18% so that we are the same level in the community. But our view is we shouldn't even attempt even adding a 0.1 to the 16%. Our suggestion is let us reduce it to 14%. And then we also reduce the mechanisms of VAT returns and the other mechanisms of our returns. For instance, if I use the example given by Vincent, you're asking an avocado farmer to produce an e-TIMS, for instance. How will they do it? Some of them don't have the smartphones that we have. They don't have the expertise. Can't we make it easy for everybody to pay taxes? The informal sector that we've been talking about, it has been done elsewhere, where you are told that you are going to pay this much if your business is, say, a butchery, and a proper tax assessment is done. And this one is already, by the way, this is provided for in the Tax Procedures Act. It provides for both self-assessment and an assessment that is conducted by KRA, where we come and assess your business and we agree that this is the much that you are likely to make if you're in this sort of a business, and this is what would be your income tax. And that is okay. But now we also have a problem with even the multinationals currently. There is what we call transfer pricing. Multinationals will have their headquarters in countries where the tax regime is favorable. In our current regime in Kenya, we view transfer pricing as a risk to revenue, instead of looking at it as an opportunity to encourage more multinationals to come and have their headquarters in Kenya. We've, in our studies at TISA, we've seen a number of multinationals moving their production plants from Kenya, because we have some tax measures that are even increasing the labor costs. When you have taxes that have an employer contribution component and they keep on increasing, then from the business angle, you're increasing their cost of production. So they would rather move to another country where you're just paying, say, income tax, and the only thing that you pay from the labor point of view is the salaries. But if you're forced to add something on, if I'm paying housing levy, the employer has to add a component. Then we have SHA, then the employer has to pay something. And we are urging the government in the coming finance bill or whatever instrument, and I'm very keen on whatever instrument, because we've seen a shift from the finance bill to now the tax laws amendment, and we are not sure what is coming our way. Whatever they're going to come up with, let us avoid a situation where we introduce additional taxes. Last year in the finance bill, you remember we had the eco levy that was coming on board. Yes. This was actually going to make the packaging material more expensive than actually the item that you have in there. If it's water like this, the bottle would be more expensive than the water inside there. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So we are urging the government to avoid introducing any new taxes. And that is a submission that we have already made. And as TISA, we do not like just making noise for the sake of making noise. We do our analysis. When there is a call for submission, we do. We have already submitted, we have already provided a submission for the fiscal budget. That is the revenue side. We have already submitted our views on the BPS. And tomorrow we'll be finalizing submitting our views on the medium-term debt strategy paper. So that we don't come late in the day to start saying, oh, you did this is wrong, because we want to provide an alternative. We say this is what we think is right. Then government has the leeway of analyzing that, because they have experts who are supposed to do that. Then what we are looking forward to is a situation where the provisions of Article 201, Article 10 of the Constitution, as read together with Section 35 of the PFM Act, come to life, where we bring what we think is right, and the government listens. Because the challenge we had last year with the finance bill, there was a sense that whatever you say is fine, but we are still going to do what we had proposed. And that is why we had all the problems that we had. So for us as TISA and the civil society organizations and Okoa Uchumi, we are here to support. But we must also be given a hearing, because we represent the voice of the Mwananchi. Thank you.
Okay, and of course, let me accord you at least 1 minute each, given that we are coming to the end of this particular program. Let me start with our senior professor, then make my way down to Vincent.
I think in terms of the ideas, here we are the same, because we are trying to share ideas with the Kenyan public,
yes,
and see how we can improve this economy. I think my closing remarks are simple. Let's spend more time focusing on economic growth, because if this economy grows and expands, I think most of the problems we are talking about will be sorted out. So I'm thinking of focusing more on infrastructure, so that there is more movement of goods and services from one part of the country to the other, the rule of law. I'm looking at security, not just the physical security, but also social security. Because one of the big problems in this country happens to be corruption. And we are corrupt because we want to make the future secure. So if pension, for example, was very well done, so that if everybody is assured of pension, whether you're in informal sector or not, people would probably feel more secure and probably focus on what they're supposed to do. And then corruption is a problem that we must deal with, whether we want or not. Whether we are coming up with a finance bill or not, corruption is an area we must focus on. Two other last things. When we talk about attracting investors in this country, we always forget the local investors. They are as important as the foreign investors. After all, charity starts at home. From what President Uhuru said, if we could overcome a big crisis like COVID-19, there's no crisis, economic or otherwise, in this country that we cannot overcome as Kenyans. We are resilient, we are optimistic, and we can only make things better. But everybody must work, and everybody must be given incentives for work well done.
Alexander, a minute.
Thank you. I want to add my voice to what the good professor has said. And my addition would be, let us be accountable with the resources that we receive from Kenyans. That is what every Kenyan is asking for. And the good numbers that we economists here and at Treasury and elsewhere are mentioning, let us hear this from the ordinary Kenyan. Are they feeling the effect of that? And the government can let the government be open to criticism. Because we have freedoms provided for in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. So when somebody complains that something is not working, for instance, the lady who was complaining about SHA, instead of then that person being arrested or intimidated in whatever manner, let us listen to what they are saying and we rectify. That way, we'll be okay as a country. Thank you.
David?
You know, during that time, for demonstrations, most of my few friends who had till numbers in their shops, they pulled them down because they were afraid KRA would come and check and, I don't know, follow up something. I think my point is we shouldn't be afraid to be stakeholders. We should contribute to the process of making things work. And in making that, I notice are good at pushing for a few things to happen. But maybe it is also about time we also consider having a room for conversation. We shouldn't attack each other all the time. We should have a conversation where we talk and say, this is my idea. And then if you are giving an idea, you should also agree that the other person also has an idea. So can we find a point where we correlate, we work our ideas together and then make it work in order to make Kenya a better place. But then when everybody wants to be the best in the space, then you realize the big brother, who is now the government, will have to impose things on people. And then eventually we flop and things goes down. So let's talk to one another. Let's have this conversation. Let's agree that we can make it work as a nation. Just having good manners and being responsible.
Okay. Finally,
since it's a minute, so let me optimize it as an economist. The good book says that come let us reason together, that even though your sins may be as red as scarlet, then I am able to wash them and cleanse them to be as white as snow. I want to say today that to the Kenyan people and to the leaders who are responsible in making economic decisions, let us come and reason together. Let us come and speak to one another. I think this idea of convening an economic summit where we speak one to another, where we agree to disagree, and we pick the best of the ideas among us, and we commit to execute them, report them, celebrate them, will actually give us the Kenya that we want.
Okay. As you can see, it's like the Oscars. You're played out with the music. Thank you so much.
I tried my best to make the most of it. Yeah.
That is Vincent Kimasopa, governance expert. Thank you so much for coming in, Vincent. David Alulu, the Chief Executive Officer of Regional Agency for International Development and Leadership. Thank you, David, for coming in. And then, of course, Alexander Rithi, who is the Head of Programs at TISA. Thank you for joining us. And then finally, the professor in the house who teaches at the University of Nairobi, of course, a pristine institution. Next to us here, the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, who is also an economist. Gentlemen, thank you for making time for us this morning. And that concludes our coverage. Don't go too far. Kasichana Masha is up next with Kurunzi Mashinani. But not fair if you missed the conversation. You can find it on our YouTube channel at KBC Channel 1. Enjoy the rest of your viewing.
Now we head to Europe and to Poland, home to the 2024 Tree of the Year. It came top in the annual contest that celebrates our relationship with nature. It's a magnificent red beech that looks pretty strong and has survived for 2 centuries. But it still needs a lot of looking after. That's where local conservationists come in. Here is this week's Doing Your Bit.
This tree in southwestern Poland has been a witness to history, including 2 world wars and a shifting of national borders. It stands in the Arboretum Wojosławice, near the city of Wrocław, and is called the heart of the garden. The copper beech, also known as a purple beech, is deeply rooted in the past.
Europejskie drzewo roku sugeruje nam, że jest to drzewo wyjątkowe, drzewo symboliczne nie tylko dla Polski, ale właśnie dla całej społeczności europejskiej. Ideą konkursu jest właśnie to, aby promować drzewa niezwykłe. Niekoniecznie największe, najstarsze, ale drzewa z historią, drzewa, które nam o czymś opowiadają.
When the beech was planted at the start of the 19th century, its leaf color was a rarity that only a few could admire.
Dwieście lat temu ktoś przywozi i sadzi w tym miejscu drzewo, które nie ma zielonych liści, a ma liście purpurowo-czerwone. Jest to coś niesamowitego. Jego roślina mogła mieć w tamtych czasach inne zabarwienie liści, dlatego te najstarsze, najładniejsze drzewa o purpurowym zabarwieniu liści spotykamy przy zamkach, przy pałacach, przy dworach.